right. Hello, hello. Welcome to Whiskey and Potato Chips, the Versado X podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Not really sure who knows what time of day it is for you, but thanks for joining. Thanks for spending your time with us. We hope you learn a little something and enjoy it. For you joining for the first time, I am your host, Beth Ellsworth. Versado X is all about continuous learning, collaboration, and finding innovative ways to approach old and new topics in the field of training, business, and just your everyday life. On today's episode, we are joined by Erik Frazier and Nancy Weitzman, both colleagues and peers at Versado Training. Both of them have a deep passion and background on today's topic, building influence. Nancy spent several years in the advertising agency business in media planning and strategy. She's been a learning producer in the life science industry for over 10 years. And Erik is a biomedical engineer and has translated that degree out of the lab and into the business world. So, without further ado, Erik and Nancy, welcome to the show. Let's talk influence.
Let's do it. Thanks for having us.
Great to be here. Excited to dive in.
All right. So, let's start by having you share what influence is, or what does it mean to each of you?
It's a topic that I know Nancy and I have collaborated on internally for Versado. We did a Versado X, like our internal training on it, but it's near and dear to me, something that I think has helped in whatever form of success that I've had in my career, as well as taught me a lot about relationships and people that I'm translating into keeping my wife around in my new marriage. So I don't know about you, Nancy, but that's influence to me.
Put it that way. I mean, it means different things to different people. And it also depends on like the context that you're thinking about influence, whether it's personal or work or whatever. But I also see it as something, it can be such a positive force, but it can also be kind of a negative if you don't handle it well.
Absolutely.
You don't deliver it well.
Yeah, no, I agree. And exactly that point. It's different to different people. It means something to everybody else. And I think we all can think of great examples of influence that have shaped us into who we are and how we relate to people. And then you can think of all those times where influence was wielded in the wrong way, and you kind of go, you step back from it and you're like, wow, that was incredibly manipulative or abusive, whatever it might have been.
Right. I think it's important to also just say, like, when it comes to building influence or like wielding your influence, it doesn't have to come from a place of authority. I mean, we work with so many people in our industry where we don't have the authority at all. We're actually, the vendor or the partner, and, the skill and definition of influence itself, which we're going to talk through today, it has no bearing on what your role is or what your title is.
Absolutely. Yeah, kind of combating hierarchy in that way and thinking like, oh, because somebody is more senior than me, they instantly have influence to me. Like, they may have authority, depending on where you lie, but the idea that they have influence over you is a holistically different thing. And I think those two play off each other well, but really breaking down what the difference between that is can be super helpful. I think it make people more comfortable with influence and also not feel like you have to be influenced by somebody that's older, wiser, or whatever those cliches are. You can actually listen to what they have to say and treat that as the moniker for influence versus I told you so, or I'm, come from a position of power.
Yeah, I mean, think about all the social media that's out there right now and the influencers and what that means. I mean, there's so many people that have supposed influence on you in certain subjects, but what do they really know about those subjects?
Right. There's no bearing on expertise, anything like that, but we give them influence and why. And I think that can be translated exactly into the same misuse or proper use of it, but defining the two, knowing what to look for, not being subjected to, like I said, abusive things at time, if, emotionally, hopefully not physically as well. But nonetheless, yeah, I think it's a cool thing to think about and explore the difference. So hopefully we learn people something today, if you will.
Did you say we learn people something
today?
I did,
yeah.
Okay, why not?
Great way to kick off.
To learn people
an
things.
Incredibly, way to be tacked on a podcast. That's how we're going to do it today.
No, that's awesome. Okay, I think that now that we know just a little bit about what influence means to each of you, where should we go next? What do you think?
Lovely question. Nancy, I'm going to take a stab at this, Nancy, but I think for me, going back to my biomedical engineering degree, it probably makes the most sense. Like, if we go top to bottom, let's build a storyline here, right? Let's talk about what influence is definition-wise. Let's go to good old Merriam-Webster, break that down a little bit, and maybe think, by understanding the definition of it, where the word came from, it can start to paint a picture of how you see it in everyday life. But does that seem reasonable?
Good. Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. No, I think that's kind of where we'll go if you're cool with that as well, Beth.
That sounds great. I just want to circle back for just a minute. Erik really wanted to throw in the fact that he is a biomedical engineer, and he may or may not say that a few more times. So, and if Nancy could attest to the fact that you probably wouldn't peg him on the street as a biomedical engineer,
You're
but
smart, Erik,
we get it. We get it.
No, thanks for bringing that up because I think it's important. I don't. For those of you who don't know, I am a biomedical engineer by trade. Is anybody keeping count?
I think that's three so far.
That's
three, maybe four.
I've never actually used my degree, but I do like to throw it in people's face.
What was the degree?
It was biomedical engineering,
okay,
actually. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
No, I appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Well, let's break down the word, right? So I actually think it's even more fun based on my degree to kind of start with not just the definition, but really etymology, like the entire word itself.
You have to define etymology, please?
I don't know if I can go there. I am, again, a biomedical engineer. I'm not an English major.
A linguist? No.
But nonetheless, the word actually comes from hundreds of thousands of years ago, if I'm using that appropriately and not exaggerating, but truly, long time ago, the idea of celestial fluid that could affect the actions of a planet's inhabitants, especially humans that might be on a planet. So, ipso facto, we know humans live on Earth. So this crazy idea of the word influence is rooted in some larger power that comes from outer space or some starborn type of thing that actually is impacting people. And so what does that really mean? Nancy, any thoughts?
Yes, please explain what that actually means.
Yeah, sure, I got you. So long before we knew why or how influence was happening, or that people were taking actions based on something that they were feeling and sensing, this strong and passive power was actually something really critical to impacting how people took direct action on things, if that makes sense.
It does. Can you, layman's terms it a little bit more for the non-biomedical engineers that are listening?
I can do that. So thinking about influence, right? Like I was saying, let's break down the word. Where does it come from? What does it actually mean? In and of itself, the word influence comes from this concept or idea that hundreds of thousands of years ago, planets were inhabited by people or beings, and there was some higher power, some celestial fluid from the stars that was impacting and influencing people's actions. And that's where the word influence comes from. So what that means to me, essentially, is that influence is this passive thing. It wasn't something that people felt. It wasn't that you saw this, laser beam come from the sky and all of a sudden people behave differently. It was really the idea of energy. It was the idea of passive energy that was impacting and influencing people to take direct action on something. And so why is that important, or what does that mean? Well, as we were talking about, Nancy, you think about influence in your day-to-day life. Influence isn't really commanding somebody to do something. That's directing, or that's giving.
And it's not something you're setting out to do. It's just happening organically, hopefully.
Exactly, right. Somebody is actually trying to give you thoughts, key takeaways, things they've learned from experience, and putting all of that out there for you, being that, to be cheesy, being that celestial fluid, so that way you are taking an action on your own volition, under your own power, and doing it in your own way. But it came from this idea of a broader concept actually driving you towards something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, when we think about the galaxy and all this stuff you're talking about, it's something that doesn't happen like that. It happens over time, over a long period of time. And it's the same thing with building influence.
Totally.
In our world.
Totally.
It takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes, just that relationship building. And I know we'll get more into that, but it all makes perfect sense from where the word generated from.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you don't think about space as being this thing that was just created at once, regardless of what ideology you think of space in. Celestial fluid, it builds up. There's just this massive energy that's out there doing things. So I think you kind of nailed that component to it as well. But, even going a layer deeper, right? So that's the root of the word. That's where it kind of came from. That's how the Latins viewed it. But nonetheless, if you look up the definition of the word influence as a noun, it's the power or capacity of causing an effect in indirect or intangible ways. So again, nearly exactly what people and philosophers were looking at in creating the concept of this word. That is how we define it today. So there's definitely something to this idea of being passive, bringing some light to folks, and giving people the ability to make decisions on their own, but impacting how they make that decision and giving them some autonomy, right? And you can look at the word as a verb as well. So to affect or alter by indirect or intangible means, essentially saying the same thing. Or another way is to have an effect on the condition or development of. And I think that is where, Nancy, I know today we'll get a lot into what you're going to talk about,
Yep.
specifically in the workplace, in those relationships. Like, how are we guiding or building influence and using it for good?
Yes,
that make sense?
in a healthy way. Absolutely.